Hi, this is a bit of an introduction, a bit of a preamble into a few videos that I'm going to put up, broadly on the theme of masochism and sadism and the way that those two positions relate to each other. And these are going to mainly draw on Freud with some Deleuze and I think some Zizek towards the end. And I'm going to basically précis a couple of Freud's key articles on the subject of masochism, and then, as I say, move to Deleuze's long essay on Venus in Furs, and then just tail it off with Zizek's writings on courtly love, which is a genre. You could probably say, you could make the argument quite coherently that Venus in Furs is an example of a courtly love. It's a sort of modern adaptation, modern version of a medieval courtly love poem. But I wanted to start off just with just a short discussion on guilt, because for Freud, guilt is the thing which causes the switch from sadism to masochism. I think I've got that the right way round. We will see when we get to the video on Freud's essay "A Child is Being Beaten." But obviously, when we think of cause and effect, we generally think of the cause as coming first, and the effect as being secondary, as coming second. So there is this temporality. Cause happens first, and effect happens second. And psychoanalysis queries this temporality. And in an example of this questioning of this cause and effect temporality, psychoanalysis plays with the idea that guilt is not a consequence of crime, but its cause. Guilt being the cause of crime rather than the consequence of crime. And in 1915, I can't remember which essay this is in, but in 1915 Freud writes, he's talking about various criminal activities, and he says such deeds were done principally because they were forbidden, and because their execution was accompanied by mental relief for the doer. So he's saying that the subject carries out some illegal deed because deeply repressed there is this primal feeling of guilt, and the individual needs some concrete act to attach that guilt to, some deed which will help him to make sense of it. And Donald Winnicott, following Melanie Klein's lead, really takes this idea up and runs with it. And in children, he says, stealing, lying, destructiveness, bedwetting are all done in an unconscious attempt to make sense of guilt feeling. The child or adult cannot reach the source of a sense of guilt that is intolerable, and the fact that the guilt feeling cannot be explained makes for a feeling of madness. And the crimes that Freud and Winnicott are talking about, they may be fairly minimal and trivial, or they may be horrific. So the Kleinian theory of where this feeling of guilt might originate, which Winnicott takes up, is this. So in the beginning, as it were, once upon a time, we have the baby and its mother. This is the Kleinian version of this story. We have the baby and its mother. Not that the baby can distinguish itself and its mother at this stage, but for the moment let's see these two as two bodies. And the baby experiences certain drives for warmth, food, touch, drives which must be satisfied. And we could say more about these drives, but let's just say for the moment, as Freud does, that they are somewhere on the frontier, on the border between the physical and the psychological. Now, the mother is the one who can satisfy these drives, and the baby therefore needs the mother, to the point where she will do anything to get warmth, food, or touch from her. Anything, including trying to destroy her. What is in the mother is good, and the baby wants it, wants to take everything good from the mother. The baby, in a sense, is ruthless, pitiless, but at some point the satisfactions that the mother provides, in the form of feeding, cuddling, cooing over the baby, those become more than just a filling in or an elimination of a physical need. The baby sucks at the nipple not just to fill his tummy, but for something else. And it might be a little too early to call this something else love, but perhaps love is a good stand-in for the moment. So this entails a discovery for the child. The child discovers the thing that I am trying to destroy is also the thing that I love. And Winnicott writes the following: if the mother behaves in that highly adaptive way, which may come naturally to her, she is able to give plenty of time for the infant to come to terms with the fact that the object of the ruthless attack is the mother, the same person who is responsible for the total infant care situation. It can be seen that the infant has two concerns, one as to the effect of the attack on the mother, and the other as to the results in the infant's own self. This concern of the child's is the genesis of guilt, and it seems to emerge from this ambivalence, this coincidence of love and hate. The child perhaps thinks that something has been broken through. The child thinks that something has been broken through his or her own destructiveness, and she wants to repair it in some way. So we have a circle which, if all goes to plan, looks like this. We have a drive experience, an aggressive urge for a satisfaction of that drive, and then an acceptance of responsibility, which we could call guilt, a working through of that guilt, and then a gesture of repair, a reparative gesture. So I'm picking out from Winnicott's essay, The Sense of Guilt, what happens when things, let's say, go to plan, when an Oedipus situation is negotiated well. This doesn't always happen. Sometimes the child will not be allowed to do his reparative work. The mother will not allow the child to do that reparative work. And in this case, the experience cannot be worked through. The guilt might not even be felt. The whole experience will just be repressed, and the guilt will remain free-floating in the way that Winnicott and Freud both describe, free-floating and awaiting an act to latch onto. Now perhaps that free-floating guilt will become attached to other signifiers, not just crimes, but also other forms of ritual, for example. And Winnicott mentions Lady Macbeth washing her hands, trying to undo something evil, trying to make things right, as a strategy for working through this guilt. And this is the classic obsessive neurotic, whereby every attempt is made to annul one idea by another, but where nothing really succeeds. And in this essay called The Sense of Guilt, Winnicott gives this very moving vignette of a melancholic girl who was practically catatonic until he helped to put her paralysis into words which gave a meaning to her love and her hatred towards the same person. In another version of the failure of this working through, perhaps the child will not even be allowed to feel the guilt in the first place. So what happens then? Would this be something like what we might call the lack of a moral compass? The failure to be inducted into a symbolic space, a space of law and of what is deemed acceptable, where one can find and take one's bearings. Winnicott wrote his essay in a certain sociological context, where the theory went that criminals did bad things because of their upbringing, because of their broken homes and their poverty. And this theory, I think this was sort of late 50s, early 60s when Winnicott wrote this essay. This had replaced the previous constitutional theory, which was popular in Victorian times, the idea that people are bad because they're made that way, they're constitutionally bad. But even so, this sociological explanation that people are bad because of their upbringing, because they were from broken homes, still didn't quite feel sufficient for Winnicott. And Winnicott says, more than anyone else, it was Freud who paved the way for the understanding of antisocial behaviour and of crime as a sequel to an unconscious criminal intention and a symptom of a failure in child care. I suggest, says Winnicott, that in putting forward these ideas and showing how we can test them and use them, Freud has made a contribution to social psychology which can have far-reaching results.